Hello and welcome to another Teacher's Corner. I'm Teacher Kirby, and today we're going to be going over the concept or the idea of threat tanking. Okay, so there was a comment on my YouTube channel from a viewer named Run Level Zero. I want to thank you for putting forth the idea of this. So his comment was basically asking me to describe the concept of threat tanking because it's a concept you never really understood. So in this video I'll be going over how you generate threat, or a few of the ways you can generate threat, and why people want to generate threat and be shot at. Okay, so first, the concept of generating threat. There's a few ways you can do this. The first and most common way is by dealing DPS. The more DPS you deal, the higher your threat generation. In other words, the more damage you can do. Okay, so there's a few ways you can generate DPS. For example, have good weapons. So for example, you see I'm using anti-proton weapons. They're all Mark 14 with the exception of this one here, of the kinetic cutting beam, which I'm going to change very soon. It will be Mark 14. I've got another way to help generate threat. I've got consoles here from the embassy. These consoles are plus threat consoles. They're weapon signature amplifiers. So they generate, where is it? They generate quite a bit of threat. And oh my goodness, it's not listed. It should be. Okay, there it is. Increases threat generation by 150% while active. Okay, which means when I'm in battle, each one of these increases my threat generation by 150%. Okay, I also have tactical consoles that help to increase my damage and my critical chance, which means that I'll be more likely to hit a critical hit with these lovely weapons. So of course generating more DPS. And then I have the full Iconian set, which means that I've got that bonus, which means I'm generating more DPS, and I've got the Iconian, the 4-piece Iconian set, which means of course that I have the clickable, which helps me again, gives me a boost to again generate more DPS. Now, so I can generate a lot of DPS with this, but DPS is not the only way to generate threat, and this is where it gets kind of tricky for someone who wants to generate threat, because there are other ways. One of the other ways it gets tricky is generating science abilities. See, science abilities have part of the threat calculation is the distance from the target. Okay, so the closer you are to the target, the more threat you generate. Well, science abilities have this lovely thing where no matter how far you are from the target, the science ability is spawned right on the target, so it has a distance of 0. So for example, if I'm a science ship, when I throw a gravity well, even if I'm 9.9 kilometers out, that gravity well in the distance calculation has a distance of 0. So then the enemies see it as I am right on top of them. And I usually then become the most threatening target if I spawn that gravity well. So basically all the enemies are going, she's right on top of us, get her, get her, get her. Okay, so this is one of the ways that people become a little more threatening. So it's important, if you're trying to be a threat tank, trying to pull a threat, to be as close as you can to the enemies. Okay, so that will help with your threat generation. So this is how you generate threat. Torpedoes are another one that the distance calculation is 0 or close to 0 because they explode right at the target. Okay, so this is how you generate threat. Threat generating consoles also, and let me beam up into space so you can see it, also this lovely thing called, and this is newer to the game, this lovely thing called, come on, called threatening stance, and it is right here. Now, threatening stance gives you 300% threat generation, and when you are damaged, maximum hull, increase maximum hull by 5% for 60 seconds, but 300% threat generation. And then also, if you are running the strategist tree, you get diversionary tactics. So while you are in threatening stance and you hit diversionary tactics, it taunts foes. Basically, it's like you're sticking your fingers in your ears and you go, nanny, nanny, boo, boo, you can't get me. Okay, taunts foes within 10 kilometers and generates another 50% threat for 10 seconds. Okay, also it gives you 5% of max hull for affected foe over 10 seconds. So if you shoot this off when you have got uh, basically, let's say 20 things on the map, okay, 20 times 5 is 100%. So you basically double your hull if you can affect everything that's in 10 kilometers and you've got 20 things within 10 kilometers. Okay? But that only works for 10 seconds. Okay? So this is a pretty good taunt here. Alright, so this is how you generate threat. There's also a duty officer if you run attack pattern delta, and we'll talk more about that later. But if you run attack pattern delta, then there's also a duty officer, Adukan, you can get that generates more threat for you. Alright, and that's why you're running attack pattern delta. Now, so that's how you generate threat. Now, the other part of the question was, why would you want to do this? Well, there's a couple reasons why you want to do this. Number one would be, the best way I can explain it is the Holy Trinity. Most MMOs have something called the Holy Trinity. So most online games like this have something called the Holy Trinity. So the Holy Trinity basically is, you have your DPS person. That's the one that throws out a ton of damage and is actually the one that usually kills things. Then you have the science-based person or the magician, and they're the ones that throw out all the fancy, cool-looking stuff to kind of keep them engaged and to heal everybody, that kind of stuff. And then you have the tank, and the tank is the one that keeps the enemy focused on them so that the DPS person can do their job. Okay? So, basically a threat tank is the same kind of deal. You want to be a threat tank so that the DPS person can do their job. If somebody who's running a lot of DPS can have a threat tank in the match with them, every time they go in a match, it means that the DPS person doesn't have to focus as much on healing. So things that would be healing can now add to the DPS person's DPS instead of having to focus on healing, if that makes any kind of sense. So basically, what you're doing if you're being a threat tank is you're helping your team to be able to do a bit better in the area of DPS or throwing out space magic, as we call it. Okay? Because believe me, a science person gets shot at quite a bit. Okay? Alright. So you're helping your team to be able to do what they really want to do or focus on what they really want to focus on and not have to worry as much about getting shot at. That's what a threat tank is for. Now, the other part of the question is, how can it be good? Well, as I said, it helps your team so they can focus more on what it is they want to do without have to worry about getting shot at. So they don't have to worry as much about building up their hull so they can take the shots. So there's a couple ways that pulling in DPS can be good for you, or pulling in shots can be good for you as well. There's a few skills that actually can help you out. And let's go for, okay. So for example, I mentioned earlier attack pattern delta. So I'm going to go ahead and go for here. So most people know of attack pattern beta, which is what DPS people usually recommend. And that is, it grants an enhancement to the owner's weapons that marks targets. Any target you attack will have its damage resistance and stealth debuffed. And of course we know about attack pattern omega. Any target, okay, every target in the map has plus 15 all damage. Sorry, you have plus 15 all damage. You have all damage resistance. Okay. You have flight speed. You have turn rate. You have immunity to movement. Okay, you have all of these things. So every target you shoot at is going to have, you're going to have a stronger thing that you put out. Well, then there's the red-headed stepchild that nobody talks about, attack pattern delta. Okay, in this case, we're looking at attack pattern delta 2. So here's why it's a red-headed stepchild. Because attack pattern delta targets can be used on yourself or an ally. Okay? So that means you can put it on somebody else. But that's not what we're worried about. Okay, what we're worried about is how this reads. The target of attack pattern delta receives a damage resistance buff. Any ship that attacks, here's the big part. Any ship that attacks the target will receive a damage resistance and stealth debuff. Okay? So what that means is this only applies to any ship that is shooting at you. Let's say you are the target of the attack pattern delta, you put it on yourself. Okay? The only ship that receives the debuff is the ship that is shooting at you. So, in order for this attack pattern to work, things have to be shooting at you. So this is a good attack pattern if you are a threat tank. Okay? So I'm hoping you're getting this. Now really, we usually only use this for ships that have, for captains that have attack pattern delta prime. Alright? So, I'm hoping you understand this. And somebody seems to be trolling me. Who is this? Somebody is having a very bad day on their ship. Alright, but let's move on. So, that's part of it. There's another skill that is very nice for people that are pulling in threat. And it's actually been kind of trending lately. Alright, and it is not destabilizing resonance beam, but I'll go ahead and pull it. Let's see. Yeah, I'll pull it on the third power. It is this one, feedback pulse. So feedback pulse, I'm actually looking at, well, let me see. Where do I have it? I've got it here, feedback pulse 2. Alright, on side 1, so let's get the long explanation of it. Skills, okay. Feedback pulse 2. Alright, so feedback pulse 2, it is a deflector field ability. Feedback pulse harnesses energy weapon attacks directed against you, meaning you have to be being shot at. If you are not being shot at, feedback pulse is useless. Okay? Each time you are hit, a damaging pulse is directed at the attacking ship. The feedback pulse travels down the attacker energy stream and will partially bypass his shields. Feedback damage is based on the magnitude of the incoming damage and increases in effectiveness based on your current auxiliary power level and skill. Now, I'll be honest, the higher your EPG, the harder this is going to hit. Okay? So it reflects up to 1.1 energy damage back to the target for 15 seconds. 50% shield penetration. So feedback pulse is the bomb if you are pulling threat. So this is where it is a good thing for you to be pulling in threat. Because the more threat you pull in, the more things shoot at you. When you have a mob shooting at you, you pop off feedback pulse, boom, everything dies. Okay, this is one of the ways that you can help your team. Alright? Is to help kill things. So, I'm hoping this answers your question. There are some other ways to garner threat, and I did mention there was a DOF, a duty officer, that when you're using attack pattern delta will help you to generate more threat. Okay, you can stack them up to 3 deep. It's called Aducon. So, anyway, so our TLDR, a threat tank, helps to keep the enemies occupied so that your team members can do their jobs without risk of being shot at, so that they can do their jobs a little better, put out a little more damage, not have to worry about getting shot at if they're a psi person, and are generating threat at 0 distance, which, oh my goodness, not a good thing, which really helps them to get shot at. Okay? And it can be good for you in that there are some abilities like attack pattern delta, for example, and feedback pulse, for example, that deal with you being shot at to help them work. Alright, so this is Teacher Kirby signing off. You can hear the discussion of Teacher's Corner live every Saturday night at 10 p.m. Eastern Time on the Pilot Review Show. I look forward to seeing you there.